Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest has written an alien invasion science fiction series, Dissonance, with the final book in that series set to be released later this month, as well as a three-part nonfiction book series about voiceover works, the Super Voiceover Artist book series. In addition to those two series, he has written multiple standalone nonfiction books, a standalone poetry collection titled Reflections, and a standalone science fiction thriller titled Forecast. His name is Aaron Ryan, also known as Joshua Alexander, and my interview with Aaron will follow the teleportation sound. Aaron Ryan, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, so I'm Aaron Ryan. I've been writing books since second grade, which is a long time ago, 1981 to be exact, and penned a best-selling sci-fi alien invasion saga that I thought was just going to be a single book. It ballooned into a trilogy that then demanded two prequels and now a sequel, making it a hexalogy of 6 books. Working on the 6th one now. It's going to be released in November. And I'm just loving life, loving telling stories. That's what I do.
I'll start with your dystopian science fiction series, Dissonance. Did I pronounce the name of that series correctly?
It's Dissonance. That's the
Dissonance.
one that I just mentioned.
Okay, yeah. Dissonance.
Yep.
Without spoiling too much of the books in your Dissonance series, how many books have you written? Well, you've already said you've written 6, but what is each book called and what is each book about?
Yeah, so I'll go in order, actually, in the chronological order that they happen in, because that way you'll understand the naming convention a little better. First is Dissonance Volume 0 Revelation, which is the first prequel, the origin story, if you will. It takes place before the invasion of June of 2026 and the alien attacks that happen in September of 2026. That goes from 26 to 2037. And then I've got another prequel called Dissonance Volume Uprising, and that happens from 2037 to 2042. So those are the two prequels. And then I've got the trilogy, Dissonance Volume 1 Reality, Dissonance Volume 2 Reckoning, and Dissonance Volume 3 Renegade, that all take place and cover the war of 2042. And I'm working on the sequel, Dissonance Volume 4 Relentless, that takes place in 2045. So it's about 1,800 pages of story that's going to result in.
What motivates you to write dystopian science fiction?
Well, we actually watched I Am Legend. I remember the night before I started writing, which was November 21st last year. We watched I Am Legend with Will Smith and thought, amazing movie. It's a great movie, but I was really impressed by the unmaintenanced landscape, the world building, the weeds growing up through the cracks and they're 5 feet tall, lions roaming the streets, complete silence, crickets. And I loved that that post-apocalyptic setting. Granted, there's zombies. I'm not a big fan of zombies, minus aliens who have settled upon Earth. But I just wanted to write a really good story of struggling to survive, of conceptual truths like justice versus revenge, cynicism versus trust, and a great big story of survival. That's what motivated me. And again, I just wanted to write a single book, but it had such depth and heft that it demanded 6. So there you go.
Why did you decide to publish prequels in your Dissonance series after the first 3 books in the series were published?
Well, because prequel is a sequel that just happens to happen pre. So a prequel, much like if you're watching Star Wars and then Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi, then you go back and watch the prequels of The Phantom Menace, The Attack of the Clones, and The Revenge of the Sith. You understand the story at that point and you want to know how it began, so you watch a prequel to go back to the very origin story. So it comes sequentially afterwards, but it takes place chronologically before. And I didn't have the idea of a prequel. I wanted to set it 16 years after the apocalypse, the alien invasion and destruction of 2026. That's where I set the very first book that I wrote. When I finished with that, I was just, there's so much fodder and material to mine that I could create a prequel. So I was compelled to do that. It worked out really well. It's my favorite one.
I'm going to next touch on your poetry, and you've written a poetry collection called Reflections.
Correct.
Without spoiling too much of your poetry collection, how many poems are in the collection, and what is the overarching theme of the collection?
Oh my gosh, how many poems do I have? I think there's at least 40 in there, if I remember right. And they are poems, journals, and reflections, both from myself and others that I've interviewed and written, like from, I'm writing, but it's their perspective of journeys and emotional odysseys that they've gone through. It isn't, there's nothing really to spoil other than just kind of going through and understanding what life journeys these people and I have been on, and perhaps drawing strength, drawing inspiration and encouragement. The overall theme is just reflecting. We don't do that much these days, and we need to take time out, sit back, unplug, untether, and just think about our lives and where we are and can we improve, things like that.
You've also written numerous nonfiction books, including The Superhero Anomaly, How to Successfully Self-Publish and Promote Your Independent Book, and by my count, 6 nonfiction books about voiceovers and voiceover work. Without spoiling too much of those books, what are they about?
Yeah, well, the 6 voiceover books are voiceover business reference books. I am an author and also a voiceover artist. I'm, for example, the voice of United Healthcare, for example, right now, and I greatly, cherish that work. It's been a boon, but voiceovers themselves, the industry is crumbling to a certain extent because of AI. Before that happened, starting in, I think, 2018, I began to write a trilogy of books that was composed of inspiration, satire, business reference and guides and how-tos from my own experience on how to be successful in voiceovers, because I've been very successful at it, and encouraging people to really take a break. It's a career where we're bombarded by rejection. As voiceover artists, we audition all the time. We're never going to get every single job that we audition for. That can be depressing for some people. So I wrote a lot of satirical pieces to encourage and inspire and say, it's okay, you can do this. That's those. The superhero anomaly is essentially from my perspective as a business owner over 30 years worth. Things lessons learned, things not to do, pitfalls and traps to avoid. And then as a self-published author, it behooved me to write a project that was helping self-published authors self-publish. It's a huge specter that scares away a lot of potential authors. Oh no, I got to market my own book. Well, you would do that anyway if you're just enthusiastic about it. So I wanted to write a guide that would help reveal some of the ways that you can be more successful as a self-published author.
Is there anything in common to how you approach writing fiction, nonfiction, and poetry? And if so, what is it?
Can't hear you. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
There we go.
Is there anything in common to how you approach writing fiction, nonfiction, and poetry? And if so, what is it?
Oh boy. No, I don't think there's too much intersection between the 3 genres. Nonfiction is a real no-brainer for me. Fiction takes great creativity. Poetry takes great creativity. So I suppose those would be common strains between those two. But nonfiction is just essentially like, in the case of the voiceover books, where I've been, the trappings that you can fall into, how to pivot, how to adapt, mantras, adopting a successful mantra like your focus determines your reality. Not relying too heavily on the affirmation or acceptance of others, things like that. Those are lessons that I've learned as a business owner that I would want to impart. The poetry does create or does demand a high degree of creativity because you are obviously trying to make things rhyme. If you're a rhyming poet, you're trying to create something that is stimulating, encouraging, thought-provoking and all of that. Fiction itself is designed to take you on a journey, on a ride of some kind. And so there's a lot of creativity employed there. I think far and away, much more creativity employed in fiction than in poetry, and definitely than in nonfiction books.
Since the start of 2024, and for our listeners, this interview was recorded on the last day of September. You've published 8 books so far this year. How are you able to get so many of your books published in a relatively short amount of time?
That's a really good question. So, and I appreciate the question too. And I'll be absolutely honest here. My primary breadwinning career is voiceovers. Voiceovers I've been doing since '93, and really saw a massive uptick in 2016. And I've been doing them full time. It's paid our mortgage. It's put our kids through school. It's allowed us to buy our cars and pay for them. Pay them off quickly, not on a 4 or 6 year plan, whatever it is. It's been exceedingly rewarding, career financially, very lucrative. However, AI, the economy, the SAG after a strike, underbidding colleagues, lowballing clients, all of those things have chipped away and eroded the industry pay scale of voiceovers. So I pivoted. I said last year I need to do something quick, especially in the face of AI. So I said I've written 300 blogs that are largely fictional as a voiceover artist. I penned 6 books that have a lot of fictional satire in them. I am a storyteller. I'm obviously a storyteller as a voiceover artist, but I'm obviously also a storyteller in writing my own blogs, books. I've written sci-fi before. I wrote it as a child, so I'm not unfamiliar with it. I just thought, if I'm a storyteller, let's start telling stories. So November 21st of last year, I started writing the very first sentences of Dissonance Volume 1 Reality. Now, I am in the face of an eroding voiceover career, I have lots of time during the day as a self-employed business owner to handle both voiceovers and writing. The fact that voiceovers have greatly slowed has given me a ton of time to be able to flesh out these books all day and at night when the kids go to bed. I'm kind of the type of person who's very driven, like a dog with a bone. When I see something and want it, I don't let go. This is what I want. I want to be a best-selling author, and all of the books so far have been bestsellers, with the exception of the latest one that was just released. That's what I want, and so I've been driven to publish and write these 6 Dissonance books. Now, the Superhero Anomaly and the publishing book and the poetry, those were all written prior. I basically just reformatted them, repackaged them, took them from different perspectives, and so those books were not written this year. They were written in the years, I don't know. Reflections was written in the early 2000s, a lot of that material. So I just repackaged it and focused it towards authors.
Are all your books self-published, or were some of your books traditionally or hybrid published?
No, I will never go with a hybrid publisher. I don't believe in it. And I think you shouldn't, any legitimate publisher will not charge you any money at all to get you published. So I don't recommend a hybrid or a vanity publisher. I've never gone with a traditional publisher. I would like to, probably someday, just to say that I'm, traditionally published. Maybe it's bragging rights. But I so prefer self-publishing. That's how I'm wired. There's so many advantages that I see. I see quicker time to market. You can command higher royalties. You retain all creative control. You can pick your own team of editors, graphic designers, marketing, things like that. You're not strapped by the type of marketing that you can do. Self-publishing allows a lot of freedom. The other thing is, like, for traditional publishers, you find errors all the time. Even if you've got the best editor, years down the way with your book. Oh man, shoot, there's a double comma there or whatever. You can, if you've got the manuscript still, and I highly advise you always keep them, you make that change, and then you can quickly upload the change and republish with that corrected version. Traditional publishers would take a lot longer to do that. So, big advocate of self-publishing.
You've mentioned your work as a voiceover artist, but in addition to your work as an author, poet, and voiceover artist, you've been a stage performer and a musician, among many other things. What has your work as a musician and stage performer been like?
I've loved it. In fact, excuse me, last year, I really thought that my calling, in light of the voiceover industry seeing a downturn, I thought my calling was to return to music. I was wrong. But in that time, I think I resurrected 4 or 5 old CDs, recreated the artwork for them, and submitted them to, it wasn't CD Baby, it was Disc Makers or something like that, and then had a bunch of CDs produced. I produced brand new 2 CDs last year, and I started to try to get back into the industry. I'm a Christian singer and performer. It's a select genre in and of itself, right there. So the odds are against you. Um, and then if you're not a cover band of any kind, then you're going to be, you're not going to fit well into an environment like a casino or some kind of local touring circuit. So the odds were kind of stacked against me in the musician field. I loved being on stage and I loved performing my own songs. It's just that the market is way different, and it's just people don't buy CDs much anymore. So it's really hard to pay your band when people aren't buying CDs and they're going to stream a song for, 3, 4, 5 cents. The bottom line didn't make any sense to remain in music.
Is it true that you still use, to this day, mid-1990s Microsoft applications like Microsoft Money and Microsoft Front Page?
I sure do. I actually am pivoting. Let's say 50% of that accusation is true. I still do Microsoft Money. It's easy. It's worked for me. That one actually, and I have such history in there. I also find that it's kind of hard to export. So if I wanted to if I wanted to migrate it to, say, Peachtree or Quicken or QuickBooks or whatever, it would be hard and probably rather unseamless to make that transition. So Microsoft Money, yes. However, I'm redesigning all of my drawings that I typically use and my templates that I typically use, and I'm using Affinity Designer. I found that early last year in trying to redesign my CD jackets, that not PageMaker, Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever I had, it wouldn't open them. And it's an Illustrator file that blew me away. So I downloaded Affinity Designer and became familiar with that, recreated them in that software, and that's what I use for design now. I don't use PhotoDraw anymore, really.
Aaron, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me so much. I appreciate it.
I wish Aaron well with the release of the final book in the Dissonance series. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.